back to Course of Action. We have another great author on today, James Rosone, author of the Rise to Republic series, the Monroe Doctrine series. Snooping around on his website today, I saw a bunch of other series with some co-authors, Frontline Publishing. We're going to get into all of that, but right now, James, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you guys, and great to have an opportunity to talk with you guys, and share our story and talk a little bit more about writing and how we
Yeah.
kind of got into the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's get right into it. Let's talk about you a little bit first, and kind of get into some things. You were former government service. Can you tell us which service you worked for? Is it one of those closed door type of things?
Everything I've done is kind of mostly open in that respect. So, like most people growing up, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. Right? You're getting ready to go to college. I was homeschooled in the 1980s and early 90s, back before it was really cool and started to take off. So, we didn't have a lot of the internet to do a whole lot of that research and stuff. It was basically 96 is when I graduated high school, and you know, the internet was just kind of coming into its own, so to speak, and just starting to have access to those kinds of things at home. And young impressionable guy, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to get my first semester at University of Wisconsin, just didn't do very well with it, and I was going to just go enlist in the military. I always wanted to join the military. I'm going to go into the Army like my grandpa did. My other grandpa was in the Navy, and when I was started to talk with the recruiters about that, my dad put me in touch with my uncle, his brother-in-law, and my uncle was in the Wisconsin Army National Guard, so he was an active guard member. So he worked active duty guard for 20 some odd years with the state, and he started telling me about this. Like, hey, look, James, if you want to go in the military, first get your college. Use the guard to pay for your college, because in Wisconsin they pay for your whole tuition if you join. He says this will kind of give you a little bit of an experience to see if you like the Army, if you like the military. It'll expose you to some MOSs, the job, to see what you might want to do
Yeah.
before you enlist and you're stuck for 4 years. And he said this way you'll get a taste for it. You'll get your college done, and then you can just go become an officer if you really want to do it full time, or however you want to pursue it. And at the time, it made sense, and that's what I did. I joined the Wisconsin Army National Guard in '96, and I became part of a self-propelled artillery unit, those Paladin units. And so I was a comm specialist, working on all those SINGAR radios and setting up retrans sites. I got cross-trained as a forward observer for the artillery. Because you're out on your own a lot of times, moving between different batteries or setting up retrans sites. And so obviously they want you to know how to call for fire if you run across things. And that's what I did for a while. And then when I graduated college, I decided I wanted to go active military. And at that point, I made the decision to actually go into the Air Force, because while I was in college, a couple of guys that I was friends with at school were from the Air Force. They got out. One of them was actually going to go back in, but this time as an officer. And so I decided to pursue that route. Oddly, I ended up just going back and enlisted, though. I had gotten selected for OCS. I was going to go in as an air battle manager in '03. And then, ironically, as the war is kicking off in Iraq, they're doing force reduction with the Air Force. They hadn't recalibrated the force for that yet.
Yep.
And so if you're a pilot or a navigator, we just lost our slots.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't going to go in as air battle manager anymore. Now I had to decide, do I want to go as enlisted, hang out for a few years, and then go officer? You know how it is, going, be inside.
Yep.
Do I go back to the Army side, or do I just scrap it all together?
Yeah.
And with the war kicking off, we trained for this stuff. It's what we wanted to do, young and dumb, and that's what you want to get involved with. And we believed in the mission, the purpose, and so I said, well, screw it, I'll just go enlisted, and did that. And very shortly after that, I got the opportunity to volunteer for what they call the 8 Deltas, linguist debriefers, and the kinder, gentler Air Force way of saying you're interrogators.
Mm.
And so basically, because it's odd, the Abu Ghraib mission, what happened over there with the Army, ironically, they lost the mission. It got handed to the Air Force. And the Air Force is like, well, we do strategic debriefings, taking people into embassies. We don't really do this tactical stuff. And the Army's like, well, it's your mission now. So they took 2 rounds of volunteers. I went in the second round. and we all went through the Echo course, the 97 Echo course at Fort Huachuca. Um, because we're Air Force, of course, they got to make us stay for every other school. So we stayed and went to the advanced interrogation analysis training afterwards, and then we went to Iraq. So by the time we ever got to theater, we already been through like 1,300 hours of training,
Wow.
and just we were really quite ready for the job. I mean, as ready as you can be, I suppose. And all of the Air Force interrogators were all NCOs. That was another requirement going into that. So we had some advantages that I guess a lot of the Army units that rotate over didn't, because there was a lot of guys coming in. They're just fresh, man. It's not nothing wrong with it. It's just they're 19, they're 20,
Yeah.
and as a 20-year-old or 19-year-old, as a trained interrogator, sure you have the skills to do it, but you don't necessarily have the life skills to be able to associate and with these some of these more senior terrorists and Al Qaeda members who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Mhm.
You don't have that educational background and life experience to really make those connections and be really more effective at that. Not at 19.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a challenging environment um, over there in Iraq, but we did the best we could. I think our Air Force unit was a pretty good unit. We were all at Camp Cropper, you know where that's at in Baghdad, right up at the next to the airport there. So
Yeah.
it's a big facility, man. 5,000 prisoners. It was not a small place.
Mm. So what did you do? How long were you in the Air Force?
I did 4 years. I was going to stay in longer, but honestly, man, that deployment burned me out. We
Yeah.
were gone for 556 days for that DUI. It was
Jeez.
wild, all things. So it was just a long deployment. I think I'd been married to my wife for a year at that time. I think I saw her maybe 26 or 28 days out of that 556. So I was just gone a long time. And when I came home, because in the Air Force, unlike the Army, you don't deploy as a whole unit. We deployed as individual augmentees. We form a new unit and then we deploy that way. So when we come home, we disperse that way back to your squadrons. And so, I come back home and I've been gone so long, my squadron, my group and wing, they didn't even know I was still a part of them. You know, I come
They
back,
thought you're PCS, man. Where you been?
Really, I mean, nobody's at the airport to meet you. Nobody's there to say, "Hey, welcome home." I've been gone for 18 months. And
Wow.
the civilians were there to welcome me back, but that's because they know me from church, and my wife was there, and so they at least were there to greet me and take my weapons and sign them back into the base and stuff like that. But I go back to sign in at the command the next day, and like, oh, welcome back, welcome to the command. You're brand new. I'm like, no, dude, I've been here. No, I was like, Chief, I've been in the squadron for 3.5 years, man. I just got back from 18 months in Iraq. Where were you guys?
Yeah.
So,
Thanks for the care package.
yeah, so, you know, it was just a kick in the nuts. You go out there, you're doing this really high intensity job. You're interrogating dirt bags, and you talk about Mohammed so and so. You get the location where it's all at, and one of the either depending on how valuable the target is, where it's at, depends on what tier units are going to usually go and execute it and go do it. And you're pulling the hoodie off of Mohammed so and so. You just wrote about in a report like a day earlier or a week earlier. Now he's here. Now you have to question him and get more intel from him to go repeat the process over and over and over. You're doing this, from 4 to 8 times a day, 7 days a week. It's a pretty high intensity job. And then you come home and you're Joe Nobody. So, that's kind of a hard transition. And like, all right, well, I don't really care for this. I'm going to get out and go contract and get back in the action. So that's kind of what you end up doing.
So what was it like looking into the eyes of Al Qaeda and the Taliban and some of these groups of high level terrorists that we were hunting actively back then?
Yeah. Yeah. It depends who you're actually talking with at the time. So, some of them are just low level dirtbags, and maybe they've got a little bit of actionable intelligence. Like for instance, who gave them the weapon? Who gave them the IED to in place? Can you describe the location? Can you point me to where it was? I show you a map. where was this location? You get that kind of stuff. Well, that can be actionable and helpful in learning more about it, particularly if they had a cell phone with contact information exchange, because you know how it works with Celex. We can take that information, and then with all the stuff in the sky, we can track it down where it's all at. Um, so you have those kinds of guys, but they're very low level. There's only so much you're going to get out of that.
Right.
And you've got other ones, like I had the number 3 guy for Ansal Suna organization. He was big wig. He ran the military aspect of the organization, and agency had him for 6 weeks. Kind of a rough treatment with him. They couldn't get much out of him, so they kicked him over to us. And I have him. So I look at what they did and said, well, I'm going to take a different approach because I think that was kind of a harsher approach, and it didn't work, obviously. And I saw in his background that he had a master's in economics. He used to run a small business in Baghdad before the war. And so that was my approach. Just saying, what happened, dude? Like before the war, you were doing this, you were doing that. You had things going. Why? What transpired that caused you to go down this line? Why did you do this? I wasn't after like his organization, where his members were, where they're getting their weapons, where they're housing them, finances, all this stuff. I didn't go that path. I first went the path of, tell me about you. How did we get here? And then as we kind of got a little more of that connection, and we did a lot of like over dinner, over lunch, smoking a hookah pipe, and you work with their cultural norms and you work your way in that way. And as we kind of do that, it became a lot easier than to start talking about what he was involved in, the organization, and learning what approach is going to work. With him, he was a lot more of he felt he was a very smart intellectual man, and he probably was a pretty smart guy, and I played to that. So it was like, well, how did you manage to outsmart us these last 3 years? Like, how did you do that? And I would just play dumb American, and he's a terrorist, and coax him into bragging about it and telling me about it. And that's how you pull it out. You be who you need you to be.
That mental warfare of, he doesn't realize that you're outsmarting him in the moment, and getting him to, spill the beans by bragging about it. And that's really cool. And
Yeah.
I was snooping around on.
Yeah, you got to be who they need. Like some guys are going to need a big brother.
Yeah.
Some guys are going to need you to be an asshole. Some guys are going to need you to be a friend, or the person that's going to help them, or they need something. It's your job as the interrogator to figure out what they need you to kind of project or be, and then you got to sell it and be that person like an actor would with a normal job, and then extract the pieces of information that you can that's of value. And what is of value is it's always changing, because you have those human collection requirements and commander PIRs and things like that. And if you're in one region, everyone wants a sexy weapon cache. They want to go after capturing XYZ. They want the cool stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, if he can tell you information about this Jaish al-Mahdi group with this Badr group, is one of the guys, he's it's a Sunni group having problems with local Shia, and the power keeps getting knocked out, or they're having problems with the water. If you can find out why that's happening, that's actually a really valuable piece of information, because we have these human domain or human terrain mapping teams and other groups that will go out and find out, like in a village or area, what's wrong. And when we can address those things, like fixing the power, fixing the water, making sure that the water treatment plant's working, they have electricity constantly, they have XYZ that they need to function as a city or a society, you can solve a lot of problems. Like you can prevent a lot of terrorist activities and make it less fertile recruitment grounds when they're not thoroughly pissed off because the Americans aren't providing XYZ or able to blame it on us. We're actually fixing something for them. They see you less as an occupier, more as a helper.
Okay.
So
trust.
It's just a different mindset. And again, it's not to say you don't want to go after, the weapon caches and figure out whether they're coming across the Iranian border, or how they're getting smuggled in, or where the money's at, or where this guy's betting down at, and all those other tactical targets. Those are important. But there are other things that are important too. And if your subject's not going to cooperate with the main target you want, don't discard them. Find the other stuff that you can. And through that period of you interacting with them and talking with them and building that rapport and actually like showing that you really want to solve some of these problems for them, you may get them to start narking on the other insurgent organization that he's been fighting. Like if he's Al Qaeda, I guarantee you that dude's going to know a whole lot about where those Jaish al-Mahdi guys are at.
Hmm.
And you got requirements to go after them too. And if he's Shia, he's going to know where a lot of the Al Qaeda guys are at. You target them. So you can work them against each other too. It's not always just about getting them a narc on their own organization. Sometimes getting a narc on the other one.
So you did the interrogation thing, got out, went to go be a contractor, and then I was snooping around on your website, reading your bio earlier today. Um, did I read it right? You have a Master's of Science from Oxford?
Yeah, so when I'm in 2011, I got into a graduate program there. Uh, at the time, I was working as a program manager at U.S. European Command, um, doing the Identity Intelligence Operations program over there. So, you know, because Admiral Stavridis was a SAC commander, he's the UCOM commander, and so we were building out this big old biometric program and helping us do something called TTL work, which is tag, track, and locate for Islamic extremists, foreign intelligence operatives, things like that. So it's part of the electronic tagging and tracking type stuff. Um, it's kind of a complex program, but there was a really neat Oxford graduate program that I saw in major program management, which helps you gets helps teach you the skills to basically scale up and build pretty complex programs and projects. And that's really what we were doing at UCOM. And my job was, part of a SOCOM task order that's funded by a bunch of other groups to build more of a global, picture, global thing that we're doing. Um, and I thought this would be an amazing program that could help give me more skills to do this job more efficiently and better. And I did not think I would get in. I applied on a whim. Um, and lo and behold, I get a call, say, hey, we want to interview you for this position here. Because in the UK, it's different. It's not like in the US. You got to have an LSAT or a GRE and you go through that and it's who you know and how good your grades are. In the UK, they look at your resume and say, okay, well, what do you do? What kind of value can you bring to the program? And are you a value add? And then let's interview you. And that's a heavy chunk of your, whether you're going to get in or not. And then it's references from different people that you work with, and that's kind of how they determine if you're going to get into a program or not. And so, I managed to get in, and it was a unique opportunity. You learn an awfully lot, learned a ton from there. And I think that really helped me with writing and researching and just being able to write a lot of what I write just better because of the experience I had from there and the people I worked with, the contacts I still have, all over the world. Because my classmates only had 4 Americans, the rest of them were all international.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, just to say that you've gone to
Oh, it's neat.
Oxford
It's
is
like
cool.
going to school at Hogwarts in Harry Potter. I mean, they filmed the movie. A lot of the movies filmed there, and you walk around. It's just like walk around the movie set. Sometimes it's kind of neat.
That's cool. So let's get into PTSD a little bit, and then we'll go right into writing because I think they kind of play on each other with
Mm,
what you're doing now. A lot of different issues. PTSD has been a huge thing since the start of Iraq and Afghanistan. It seemed to just kind of get that label. I don't want to say official, but it really rose to prominence um, as we were into those two conflicts. And I think a lot of people just associated them with military who had been in combat, and they didn't associate it with military who had been deployed, contractors and civilians that have been deployed, all our different partners. And I think it's finally becoming a thing where people are realizing PTSD is not associated just with the military. It is associated with any kind of traumatic
Adventure.
situations, stressful
Yeah.
situations. That's post traumatic stress syndrome, So, what are you kind of doing and exploring now? Kind of help with some of those therapies. There's something you mentioned in our emails, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, so my job in Europe eventually came to an end. It was the financial stuff in the early 2010s. We had the sequestration going on, and it was just arbitrary 10% cut across the board. It didn't matter how important the programs were. You just had to cut 10% everywhere, every single year. Well, third year in, you're cutting down like 30% at this point. It was quite steep, and our program wasn't immune to that. And so, my spot got cut. Each COCOM has its own special operations element to it, and so the SOC years or the SOC units were a little higher priority than the COCOM support was. So those stayed. It was our COCOM support elements that started to get shaved off, and so I came back to the U.S. and it just had to find another job. I went to work for another government contracting job. I was doing stuff inside DC though, similar work but different. I can't talk a whole lot about that particular job, what we were doing with that, or
Sure.
what we was involved in. But I did that for a little while, and then again, sequestration even hit them because then the contract they were on didn't get renewed, and so I couldn't stay on with that company because that position went away. Well, unfortunate for me, it was bad timing because I was in the middle of my clearance renewal process. And so now you're not on a contract, you just because it went away, and you're needing your renewal for your clearance. So that doesn't happen. And in our world, when your clearance expires, you're out. Once you're out, you're out.
Oh
There's
man. Yeah,
very
you got
difficult
to
to
be
get.
in one of those organizations to get the paperwork through.
Yep, exactly. You got to be on a TS clearance, a TS slot to be able to get your renewals for your TS and all the other stuff you're doing behind the scenes and stuff. So, it was just bad timing on my end, and that resulted in quite a bit of time being unemployed as I was looking for other civilian jobs and being in the DC market when in 2004, 2014, 2015 was a rough period, and I think that's when the PTSD really started to hit me pretty hard because now I had a lot of time on my hands. And before you're running and gunning and working, all the time, you don't have time to think about that stuff. But suddenly when you're unemployed, you have a lot of time. And that's when you start to think about all the different things you're doing. You're like, man, some of the stuff was good, some of it was pretty jacked up. And you start to have some of the different challenges. And I got into writing therapy just out of from someone at the VA is just kind of randomly, and that's what I started doing with the writing, and basically just getting it off your chest, just writing and getting it off your chest was good and cathartic in its own right. But I didn't want to keep rehashing things and writing and doing that. So my counselor was like, "Well, why don't you write books you would like to read?" And I didn't know anything about writing books, but I started writing stories I wanted to read, and eventually it formed into a book, our first book that we wrote a long time ago, and published it through Amazon. And next thing you know, people start reading it, and you start making some, a couple dollars here, a couple dollars there. And I wrote the second book, and it started to sell a little bit more. And I wrote the third book, and now it made actually several $1,000s, in a couple of days. And I was like, holy cow, this might actually really turn into something. But at that time, I got another job, and I was working with Aon, as a VP with that company, and you're making good money. And it's like, well, do I take the chance and just jump and do writing full time? Or do I stay at this safe, stable job where I have health insurance, paid time off, I have set work hours, and do that? And I was writing on the side and kind of content with that. And when they sold off part of the company, and they sold off a big chunk of the company to BlackRock, and like 2,000 of us got laid off, 4 days later. And when that happened, I was like, all right, well, it's 2017. I can either find another job in the same field that I'm not necessarily really liking because I really liked my government stuff I was doing, but I can't do it anymore because I'm no clearance, I'm out. Or I can just go all in on writing. And that's when I kind of made the decision to go all in on the writing and just bet the farm, just bet everything on my own ability to succeed and do this. And we got lucky with some of the early on books we wrote. And in the summer 2017, I wrote the first book that really took off for us, Battlefield Ukraine. And then it was about the 6-book series of a big global war, how that thing would start with Ukraine, Korea, Taiwan, and just develop the whole thing. It's basically Red Storm Rising just really expanded. A lot of POVs, the whole world instead of just Europe, in 21st century technology, and it took off. And when that thing took off, that really proved to be my wife that we can do this full time. We can write full time and keep that going. And it's just been kind of building from there, basically.
I really found writing to help me have an outlet. And I wrote my
Mhm.
latest book. I got several works of fiction in progress, and it gives me that creative outlet and kind of that space away from you know the the nuances of daily life. I have a 9 to 5, and I work that job because I have to, and it helps take care of the family. It's not something I love to do, but it's something I'm good at, and it works, pays the
Mhm.
bills, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
Important stuff.
and it certainly supports my wife. When she wanted to go through school and she graduated, she's making triple the money I am, and that was the whole point. But you know, you're going through the emotions. So what do you do? What do you do when military service comes crashing out of you and you realize I'm not there anymore? What do you do when you're not in the action anymore and those things come home? I found that writing really helped me get through some dark times where I was questioning a lot of different things. And I think it's cool. I've heard of so many. I just interviewed a couple authors this week, and they were all in the same situation.
Yeah,
Found writing and started writing about what they were passionate about, what they wanted to write, and it turned into a thing. And it's the most fulfilling thing. You can see it in their eyes, see it on their face. Like it filled a void. I think it's so awesome. And but
yeah,
you not only turned it into a full time gig, successful full time gig, but
yeah.
you also have frontline publishing. Let's talk about that before we dive into the series a little bit. When did you start frontline publishing? Why? How? All that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess as a writer, I kind of have a few advantages that some others may not, in that I have a really good business education and background going into this field. Um, and that did help. So, one of the things when we first started writing full time, and Battlefield Ukraine came out, and then Korea, we started making quite a bit of money. Like we were having months where we would get 10, 15, we eventually had a $20,000 month.
Wow.
And in our USA was like, hey, this looks like a business, and we're not a business bank. You need to set up a business checking account and go somewhere else. And because we were having it all paid to ourselves. And this is like our first few months doing this full time, because before it's just a hobby, right? And that's when I go, wow, okay, we better get a real business set up. So we set up, we basically created Frontline Publishing, set up as an S corporation, so that way we would be paying ourselves as a W 2 employee, because part of the challenge of being self-employed is proving income, and you need to prove income so you can qualify for mortgages, you can qualify for a car loan, you qualify for financing. You've got to have those things. And a lot of people
Right.
don't think about that. Writers don't think about that. All they care about is showing zero profit, paying no taxes, and doing as little as possible. And while financially that's a great endeavor to do, it's not going to allow you to buy a house. And you're going to want to buy a house at some point, and you need 2 years of taxes. So you
Yep.
got to start setting this up at some point, a proper way to doing that. And we were very lucky that we got that going in early 2018, because then when the pandemic hit in 2020, we were an S corp, and we've been around for a couple of years with a couple of years of taxes, and that helped us because suddenly we qualified for different government support and things that were available for small businesses. And I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth and say if the government's going to give corporations and businesses, PPP money and not take it myself. I qualify for it. Why would I not take that?
Sure.
And yeah, to help us out, because we incurred a lot of extra expenses. I suddenly have to have childcare when I didn't need to earlier because, um, you know, everything shuts down.
Hmm.
Uh, we had to get a computer because I got my daughter suddenly had to do classes on Zoom. Well, she can't be on Zoom and me writing at the same time. It doesn't work that way. But they also had like the economic injury distress loan, the EIDL loans through SBA. And if you're a business, you can apply and get money directly from the Treasury Department, bypassing a bank, bypassing all the red tape that's involved in doing that. This was a massive lifeline for small businesses. And we're a small business. So I took advantage of a lot of those things. And now I had the one resource that every writer struggles to find, and that's money for marketing, money for advertising. And we were able to really take a lot of that and grow and build the business very quickly. And, you know, I got into the writing for PTSD therapy and working and doing that. Some of my beta readers were veterans, and when we moved back from Chicago back here to Florida, one of my beta readers, he's a retired colonel. He'd been a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, then became an officer, and rose all the way up to being a colonel. And he's helping me with certain scenes, and then he was telling me about what he wanted to do. I said, "Well, why don't you write your own memoir about this?" I mean, that was my first book I wrote. And write your own memoir about this and do that. And then when I get down to Florida, we'll meet up for lunch because I was moving back to my old house here in Florida. It just happens to be 20 minutes from his. So that's what we did. And, that's Matt Jackson. And so I introduced him to my cover designer, my editor, kind of helped shepherd him through that. He had his first few books out. And here he is, 74 years old, making, 4 or 5 grand a year in retirement, writing books. He's got 7 books out now. And it's like a whole new lease on life on this guy because he's found this new awesome outlet. He's gone from working like, being a colonel, working full time doing that, to running and owning his own business where he's working like a banshee on that, and then retirement. And suddenly he's not go, go, go for like he has been the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now everything kind of is hitting him. And his wife was telling me that, it's like a new man after all this. And that got me thinking, well, heck, man, we got to do this with Matt. Maybe we could open this up and try and do this with a few other veterans. And so we started working with, T.C. Manning. We did one book. We did 2 books with him, and then he's going to go off and do his own thing. And then Alex Aronson, working with him, he co-wrote a couple portions with Monroe Doctrine books 4 and 5. He was a Russian linguist in the Navy, so he's really able to help bring in some of that Russian aspect of the Monroe Doctrine for me. And then, we helped pivot him, and now he's launching his series, and his series is moving forward. And my whole concept with that wasn't to create a publishing company to just publish a bunch of other veterans and kind of do that and walk away from writing myself. Writing is the therapy for me. That's not stopped. Okay, that's still something I value and do and want to keep doing. I mean, Oxford Business says I should step away from writing and build out the publishing business and leverage my marketing skills to grow and build that. That's the business school. But the personal side says that's not good meant for my own mental health and what I need to do for me. So it's been a little bit of a fight trying to, toy between both sides. But honestly, I enjoy the writing piece of it, and I want to continue doing that. And so right now, I'm kind of content with helping to support Alex and Matt and these guys and keep them kind of moving forward like that. But I don't know that I'm going to create a publishing company like that. I know Andrew Watts did that. He created Severn Publishing and went that route and did that. Stopped writing for a long time and then really kind of built that piece out. And I don't know that I really want to go that path and do that per se because it's a lot more headaches, to be honest with you. And I personally enjoy writing. I don't necessarily want to be a project manager overseeing 20 writers and worry my head off like crazy that they're not getting their stuff done because I'm on the hook for it with Amazon. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. I
The
can
pre-order's
totally
up, man.
understand it.
You're committed, man. That
Yeah,
pre-order's up, man. It don't matter if you got to work 20 hours a day. You got to get that stinking book done.
yeah, absolutely. Once you set a date and you're full steam ahead,
Oh,
it's like
yeah,
you'll set
dude,
all
I'm in
these
that purgatory
deadlines and
hell
stuff.
right now. I'm
Like,
in pre-order hell right now, and I've been in pre-order hell for probably 6, 7 months right now. It's just trying to overcome some self-inflicted wounds, and trying to get that going. And so I've been working like a banshee. I mean, we've had our best year ever, this last year, but that was not an easy year.
so let's talk about some of the writing. Let's talk about looking on your website today, and I was like, wow, there's so much. You've written books yourself. You've co-authored some books. Um, Rise to Republic series, the Monroe Doctrine series. I think I saw a Red Storm series, a World War III series. A couple of co-authors. Like, how many books have you put out with your name on them?
So from it's not as it sounds like a lot, but in a way, in the indie world, it's not quite as many as some people have. Um, I'm not one of these guys who wants to write a book a month. I don't do that. That's just one. My books are way more research intensive and technical. I have multiple layers of professional editing woven into there. So it takes a certain amount of time to produce the kind of books we do. I just won't chintz on some of the quality pieces like that. It just takes time. Um, at the same point, this is a business, so we have a good process in place now where, and mind you, this is your full time job. You have a lot of time to write. You can really crank out some stuff. So I'll spend maybe 7 to 8 weeks to write about maybe a 550-page book. And then when I'm done with that book, I hand it off to my editor and my wife, who then go through and they fix everything and they handle all that. And then I'm on book two, and they're working book one. I finish book two, book one's done. It goes book two goes to them, book one gets published. I start book three, so it's like a conveyor in a way.
Yeah.
And once the process is kind of moving along, it stays going pretty good unless you have a hiccup. We had a hiccup, and I've been overcoming the hiccup, but it was a bad hiccup, um, and just continue to move along with it like that. So that's our process, so to speak. Um, as far as like the co-authoring piece, so part of what I wanted to do with the mentoring aspect was bring them in and have them write part of my main book with me, because then I can show them how we're doing this. How do you craft the scene? How do you draw the reader in? Because a book is kind of like a living being. It has its positive and negative arcs. It goes up and down, like an EKG does. You have your highs and lows and your positive and negatives. And when you lay that out and you do it well, the book becomes a page turner. And that's where a lot of writers struggle, is how do we lay it out, because they get this diarrhea of the mouth and they just write everything all over the place. It's just a scattered mess, and nobody can know what's going on in the book, and it doesn't do well, and you don't make any money with this thing. So when you figure out the formula of what makes a bestseller, it's just about repeating it over and over and over again, and coming up with good stories and characters that people associate with and want to read more of, and then having obviously believable scenarios that people want to learn more about. And doing that, I lay out my chapters. It's action, dialogue, and you follow a formulaic, process like that.
Mhm.
And so I had a couple of guys co-write with me to teach them that process. And then when it's time to do their own spin-off, their own series, we go through their outline and we help them craft that piece there. And we work and do that and get them rolling with that piece, and move along that way. So I'm about teaching these guys
Which
how
I
to
think is
fish with a
awesome.
call, not give them a fish and make them dependent on me, where they're just coming to me as like a publisher, turning in a book, we edit it and publish it. I'm teaching them the whole business. I'm teaching them, how to write it, how to publish it, how to market it, because I want them to be able to go on their own away from me and actually make money and do this on their own,
I
not
think it's so
become.
cool.
Yeah.
It's such
But
a
that's the difference between a mentorship and like a publishing company.
sure,
You know,
it's such an unselfish thing to do, to to give away the secrets, and sometimes
well,
in
don't do
business.
it everyone. It's just so
Okay, maybe not
important.
everything, but yeah, but to do that is such an unselfish thing, and it's such an awesome act of kindness and generosity to do that, because it can be very difficult to break into publishing, and it can be very difficult to self-publish and find success, and sometimes feel like you're spinning your wheels. So to have a mentor do that for you is just incredible, and I tip my hat to you, because I think that's so awesome that you've done that.
It's been challenging. I'm not going to lie and say it's been easy. It's been incredibly challenging, and more challenging than I necessarily thought it would be. But it comes down to, we have a problem in our community. We have a lot of veterans that are committing suicide. I've had, gosh, what is it now, like 13 of my friends go that route. And I'm not going to lie and say I haven't thought that myself. I mean, I've been all the way down to like just falling asleep and not following through, before I finally woke up and got some help on this problem. So, I mean, I've been there. I get it. I understand it. I'm not going to say I'm cured or anything like that, because I still struggle with it myself. But if we can't get these guys a new mission, a new purpose, I don't want to say identity, but a new reason to get up every day and continue on, you're not going to address that problem. And no amount of programs and self-help things are going to solve that. You've got to give them a new skill. You've got to give them a new reason to wake up. So writing is a great way to kind of fill some of that. And then when they learn the business and learn how to do it, and they can see they can support themselves, now you've satisfied all of those notches, and you're going to help solve that problem one person at a time. It's slow, and it's not something you can mass produce, unfortunately. At least I don't know how I could do that. But at the same point, it's effective and it works. And you can't solve the problem for everyone. You can't fix it all, but you can fix it one person at a time. And then you just continue to work one at a time and keep doing it like that. And steadily it adds up, you know.
So let's talk about some of the series. And first of all, I want to start off by saying you have some of the coolest cover art. I don't know
Mm,
who you got doing your designs, but man,
I had two different ones. So the thrillers are all done by my guy in Belgrade, and then my sci-fi is all done by another guy in London.
oh well,
Yeah,
they must be
they're good.
elated
They're
because
great.
man, they crush it. Like I'm looking at the Monroe Doctrine right now, and it's just spot on. I
Mm-hmm,
love the way they look. It just kills it. It just screams action as soon as you look
mm-hmm,
at it. And that's exactly what you want. You want your cover to speak for itself. But
mm-hmm,
let's talk real quickly about some of the series. We'll start off with the Monroe Doctrine and kind of
mm-hmm.
what that is and kind of where it's going briefly.
Yeah, so all of our books are very thematic books. Okay, I don't write character-driven books. I write theme-driven books, and that's a very different kind of author, different kind of writer. A lot of people write character-driven stuff, and that does generally do maybe even better. For me, I'm about themes. I want to talk about specific topics and push that, and I have characters that support it and show it. So when we looked at like the Monroe Doctrine, I really wanted to look at you know, the evolution of artificial intelligence, autonomous warfare, drones, and how that's going to impact the future of modern warfare. And we wrote that. That came out originally, was maybe a year and a half before what we've seen going on in Ukraine. But everything that's going on in Ukraine is exactly how we wrote it would play out in both the Monroe Doctrine and in Battlefield Ukraine, our Red Storm series. It's all word for word how it play out, including like the whole Russia's narrative to go into Ukraine. We wrote the almost exact narrative, exact justification reasons were in our book 5 years ago.
Wow.
Because it's predictable. Once you know the patterns and you see how this stuff works on the world stage, and you put some of your intelligence training in education into looking at it, divorce yourself from your country, from the narrative that we're all embedded and taught,
Hmm.
and look at it from their perspective. Put your adversarial red hat on and red cell this thing and look at it from their perspective. If I'm country X, how am I going to jack up America? Or how do I view America if I'm country X? When you can do that and put yourself in that shoe, you come up with some really good story scenarios, some really good book scenarios. And they're quite realistic because you're willing to not see America as the good guy, see America as the bad, evil person. And then you go back to being an American and they're the bad guy. And how are you going to counter it, right?
Hmm.
And that's how you create believable scenarios, believable characters, because they're true to their who they're supposed to be.
Authentic.
Your Chinese character needs to be very pro-China, very anti-Western. Whatever they are, they have to be true, or it's just fake.
Yeah.
It's not going to be real, and the readers are going to catch that. They're going to see that, and you're not going to get that read through, and they're not going to stick with you for 6 or 8 books in a series because it's not interesting.
Yeah, I
You
was
know, I got to make it. I got to have them draw through because that's how you're going to earn your living.
yeah, I was writing some dialogue today in an idea that I had, and I was writing it from perspective of and the guy I had envisioned in my head was a Hispanic member of a motorcycle gang. And I started writing some dialogue, and I said, "Wait, hold on." And I pulled up YouTube and was watching some Sons of
So
Anarchy
listen to those guys. How do they talk?
episodes, and what's the other one? The spinoff show. I
I
can't remember the name
don't
of
even
it.
know. I know what you're talking about, but
Yeah,
I personally don't
I
waste enough
started
time.
watching clips of those, and I was like, oh no, I got it wrong. Like I
Mm.
got to get a little more authentic. And what how I was hearing him talk was not the way you know, they were talking, at least on the show. I said, I got to make it visible a little bit more. So just, yeah, doing those things to make it a little more authentic. You got to put yourself in those shoes or find those ways of researching it and making it connect. Because if it sounds fake, yeah, what's the reader going to do? Immediately associate it with being too far fetched or fake, wrong, and they're just going to turn them off.
We have like access to resources that writers 10 years ago, 20 years ago never had. I mean,
Yeah.
YouTube and Google Earth are phenomenal. So
Oh, yeah.
when I'm writing about, a fight scene, an action scene where the Marines are hitting the beach at this location, they're going on this spot here in Taiwan or whatever. Well, I can go to Google Earth and I can look at that beach. I can look at people's pictures of the area and I can go, that's not sandy beaches. That's quite hard, rocky pebble stuff. Okay, well, I need to make sure that when I'm writing this, I'm integrating that in there and not putting the wrong stuff. What does it look like? Like, is it wide open? Is there a bunch of stuff in front of you 100 yards off the beach? What is it? And then, wow, this looks great on a map. But when you look down, you're like, holy crap, there's a lot of like rivers and dikes and rice paddies and stuff. That is a horrible spot to do a landing with any kind of armor or mechanized force. You're going to want to go over in another area. Maybe Hellborn guys in here, but you're not going to want to go in and bring some vehicles. They're going
Yeah.
to get stuck in this stuff. So that's part of doing the research, though, and using the tools you have. So when you write these things, someone who lives there looks it up and go, "Wow, that is spot on."
Yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
certainly don't want to. And you know what Google Maps has really helped me out with is distancing. So
Mm-hmm. That's big
i-
time.
in a way, you
Yep.
don't want to be like, oh, it's a couple of miles up the road. Well, it's not. It's
No,
20 miles up the road. It's more than a couple. It's a
because you do topographical piece too. So you go from like 2D to 3D. Well, now you go, whoa, that's a big freaking mountain range going up over there.
elevation's different. Yeah, they're looking
Yeah,
up as opposed to flat, or maybe
yeah.
the alley is very narrow that they're walking down, or about to drive down, which poses all kinds of different risks and
Mm-hmm.
scenarios. So yeah, Google Earth has been huge. Just doing research
If
outside of the
you look at
box.
the map, yeah, look at the maps of Europe. Okay, so people are like, why is Russia all up in arms over NATO and expansions in Ukraine and the Baltic states? Well, look at the freaking map. Okay, the Baltics right there. You've got 7,500 NATO troops and tanks right there. Well, how many miles is that from St. Petersburg? I believe it's less than 100 miles. How many miles is Kharkiv from Moscow? Like 318 miles. Is it possible that they might not want to have a division of American armor a few hundred miles from their capital? Would we want to have a division that close to ours, Chinese or otherwise? I'm not justifying or anything about what Russia's done at all. I'm trying to give an alternative perspective
Yeah,
of why they felt they had to do X, Y, and Z, and where we failed in assuring that that's not what our intent is. That's the problem. Is we failed to convey our intent is not to do X, Y, or Z. They perceive it as that's exactly what you're going to do, and they reacted accordingly, as we would. And now we have this problem, you know, and but look at a map.
yeah,
So
absolutely. Because I mean, Russia doesn't. I mean, they don't want to be surrounded by NATO, which is exactly what would happen if NATO expanded, into Ukraine. And who else does Russia share a border with? You know,
the only country left is Belarus is the only one that would not. If once Ukraine's in and the Nordic states in, the only one left is Belarus, and you got the entire thing. Then Georgia down south there, Azerbaijan's already in the bag for us. Um, you know what I mean?
yeah,
The bigger question is why have we not tried to work and bring them in with us though? Why was it that they had to be the adversary when in reality they would have been an exceptional partner as a containment thing with China?
yeah,
Henry Kissinger in the 70s had really pioneered opening things up with China, with Nixon going over there, because we had the China Sino split, the Soviet Sino split, right? And we had the Chinese allying with us against the Soviets, and that was something we played them against in the Cold War. Well, going forward in the 21st century, it should have been like flipped. It should have been us working with the Russians to play against the Chinese, and we didn't do that. And instead, we've done the exact thing that Henry Kissinger warned we should never do, which is force the two into a warm embrace. And that's what you don't want, because those two fusing together is a really bad combination. Because
Yeah.
now you've given China massive population, technology, and industrial capability, a resource state, the access and a partnership with a country that can fill the one thing they don't have: natural resources and energy. And it's a
Yeah.
problem.
It's a
It's a
horrible
real problem.
marriage that we've
It's not
unfortunately
what
kind
we
of
see now,
forced.
but I'm telling you, if you look out to 2027, 2030, 2035, this is going to be a big, geopolitical strategic problem for us.
So let's talk real quick before I let you go. Let's talk about what's in store for 2023. Um, what do you have on the horizon? What are you maybe releasing this year, and what's kind of in the works for maybe next year in 24?
Yeah, so this year, I'm working on the eighth sci-fi book. Into the Terror is the one I'm physically writing right now. My It's set to release in March. We're technically going to try to actually release in the middle of next month. As soon as that's done, I go to work scrambling to get Monroe Doctrine Volume 7 done. There is the eighth book for that series is not up yet as a pre-order, but there will be an eighth and final book. And then when I'm done with 7, I'm rolling right into 8. So what I'm doing with the sci-fi is I'm actually putting the next sci-fi one quite a ways out. Unfortunately, I have to do that, because what I need to do is I got to get back to just focusing on one series. And that means I've got to build some time with the sci-fi so I can just focus and do 2 thrillers back to back and finish that series. And then I can then wrap up the final books in the sci-fi before I go back to the next main thriller series again. And so we have 2 really big series that we've been mapping out that we're going to, progress forward with. I don't want to say a whole lot on them just yet, because I'm still a little ways out, unfortunately, from putting the pre-orders up. But this year we'll have probably at least 3, maybe 4 books will come out this year compared to 6 last year. And then next year we'll probably pick up the pace a little bit more, because we'll be a little more focused in on one genre again.
Okay. And where can people go to find out more, get in touch, sign up for the newsletter, hit your socials? Tell a little bit about that.
Sure. So obviously Amazon.com is where you can find the bulk of our books. They're all there. They're part of Kindle Unlimited as well. So if you're in that membership, you can do that. They're all in audio as well. And then you can look us up on Twitter. There's Facebook, our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com. It's all one word. That's where you can actually sign up for our newsletter and so on like that. But we're on. You can find us online. I mean, we got a pretty good presence on Facebook, and we're building a bit of a presence on Twitter. Kind of ignored that for a while. Kind of getting a little more into it now with the new management and such. So you know, we're around. You find us. We're very easy to connect with too. I mean, super easy to connect with. Invariably, you can send me an email. I'm almost always going to respond within 24 hours, sometimes within the hour or so. So pretty responsive with things.
That's awesome. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on. Really interested in the Monroe Doctrine series and some of these things that you have coming on. So consider me a fan and a follower for sure. I appreciate your service, everything you've done. And it was just a pleasure having you on tonight. I really appreciate it.